You're listening to Boobies and Newbies, brought to you by the Frolic Podcast Network. This episode is brought to you by Kensington's newest title from Minerva Spencer, Outrageous. Calling all my fellow Bridgerton binge watchers, have you been longing for a historical romance to satisfy that Regency craving? Then may I present Minerva Spencer's Rebels of the Ton, a series that celebrates women who break the mold to follow their dreams and personal desires. This series is all about a younger generation that has no qualms about breaking the strict rules of Regency-era London. How badass is that? If you're a fan of modern-feeling female characters in a historical setting, turning expected tropes upside down, and of course, swoon-worthy heroes, then I have zero doubt that you will enjoy Minerva Spencer's work. In Outrageous, the second installment in the Rebels of the Ton series, the heroine kidnaps the hero and threatens to have her way with him instead of the other way around as they race to the Scottish border. Do you know how long I've been waiting for this story? I, for one, would love to see a lot more handsome hostages in historical romance. Whoa, say that 3 times. You can find Outrageous by Minerva Spencer wherever books are sold. Find out more at kensingtonbooks.com. That's KENSINGTON books.com. And now, back to the show. Welcome to Boobies and Newbies, the podcast that asks novice romance readers to think outside the dick in a box and brave the unbridled world of erotica. Joining me for today's episode is the lovely Becky, one half of the team behind Buzzing About Romance podcast, here to talk about her summer reading challenge, what's coming up on the podcast, and of course, all things romance. Please join me in welcoming Becky.
Thank you for having me, Kelly.
Thank you for joining me. I'm so happy, first of all, that we connected via Instagram, which I feel like is how I make friends nowadays.
Yes.
So it's always fun to just find, I feel like especially during the pandemic, there's just been more and more and more romance-oriented podcasts and YouTubers and TikTokers at this point coming out of the woodwork. And so it's so fun to just see the community growing and growing more and more.
Well, yeah, I've been reading romance for a really long time, and a lot of times it felt very solitary. You would join a book club and maybe they would hint that they were going to read something that borderlined women's fiction romance, and then you'd get into the book club and it's all like everything has to be taken seriously, or they end up down the YA rabbit hole, which is fine, but my first love, my always read is romance. So like Bookstagram and Book Talk and all of that kind of stuff has been great because I feel like I have found my people.
Yes, exactly. Well, and so clearly you are no newbie to the romance genre. Not only do you have your own romance podcast, but you're clearly a longtime reader of the of romance. I know this because we've also talked about this off of the podcast.
Yes.
That you found your calling in historicals. So let's talk about sort of what drew you into romance.
Well, I've been a lifelong reader, so I should state that. And I have all of my memories are connected to reading. I can tell you my favorite teachers from school growing up because they were teachers that encouraged reading or read aloud to us and gave us stories and stuff like that.
Nice.
So reading's always been a big part of who I am. At one point, I owned every Babysitter's Club book that ever was written up until I switched over to the Sweet Valley High.
Yes, girl, you scream that from the rooftops.
And so it was just a natural progression. And my mother always had stacks of books by her bed. And my mother read a lot of historical romance. She had a connection to Jude Devereux, so those were always by her bedside. And I remember being, I think it was in the 8th grade, so around 14, needing a book to read. And I didn't have anything. Mm-hmm. So I kind of snuck over into her bedroom one afternoon and took a book from the bottom of her pile, hoping she wouldn't notice that I had taken a book. And I read The Conquest by Jude Deveraux, which is a medieval romance. So there's not a lot of cleanliness and bathing in those books.
You have to immediately set that thought aside when reading anything historically set.
So yeah, I cut my teeth on The Conquest from Jude Deveraux, and then it just kind of snowballed from there. I've read Jude Deveraux's entire catalog, all of Julie Garwood, Judith McNaught, Joanna Lindsay. I read Phyllis Whitney, Minerva Spencer, Fern Michaels. I mean, these were Kathleen Woodwis, all the old school romances that came out with Fabio on the cover. I think I've read them all.
Yep. Sounds about right. Just name dropping all over the place.
Yes, I love it. But do you see, like, romance books and reading are my identity. Like, going through high school, going through college, there was never a time when there wasn't like a paperback in my backpack or, you know, my stack of books for high school. Like, there was always a romance paperback. I remember one time I had a teacher. I was reading I think it was a Judith McNaught, like Something Wonderful book of hers. And a teacher came over and asked if I was reading that. And I said, yeah. And she's like, could I borrow that when you're done with it?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Like, I love that.
So I loaned my book to a teacher.
What's funny is I had a similar experience, although it didn't come until college, that one of my professors, who to this day I think of as one of the smartest, most well-rounded women I've ever had the pleasure of knowing, she passed by me sitting and reading I want to say, I started with contemporary, so I want to say it was like a Laurie Foster book. And I'm sitting on the couch in the green room reading Miss Laurie Foster, and my teacher rolls in and is like, oh, Laurie Foster. Yeah, I love her books. And that was like the moment that it clicked for me that, oh my gosh, these brilliant, smart, wonderful women out in the world are reading the same books that I am. That's amazing. Like, this is the woman I want to be when I grow up, I thought to myself at 22.
Yeah.
So it's brilliant. I love that.
I had an encounter with Jennifer Cruzy. She used to be a professor at Ohio State University. And
oh, nice.
Bet Me, if you haven't read Bet Me, which is one of her contemporary romances, so good. I love that story. She used to teach a creative writing workshop at the OSU campus in Columbus.
So cool.
And she was so smart and funny and engaging. And she didn't have space in her life for anyone that talked down about romance. Like, and it was actually her that brought to light like the evils that is a certain male author that writes really bad books that people say are romance, but
aren't.
Yeah. I don't speak his name. It's like a curse.
Yeah. He who shall not be named.
He who shall not be, like, yes, worse than any.
Jennifer Cruzy, though, is one of those authors where I feel like she was one of the first ones that I was reading. And in fact, I actually just finished my big road trip across the country, and I grabbed a couple of old Jennifer Cruzys from a used bookstore. But she, I think, was covering a lot of more what I would consider like modern topics and contemporary topics in her books, even like 15, 20 years ago. So I would always recommend that people take a read of Jennifer Cruzy's books, because I think they've aged pretty well for the most part. So that, I don't think that can be said about a lot of books pre 2010. So I think her books are worth taking a peek at.
I would agree with that. And I also think, if you like the Olivia Dade books, the real-bodied heroines with the super smart or attractive men that might be a little flawed. I'm currently doing a reread of, spoiler alert, for an upcoming episode. And I'm reading that book, and in my brain, I'm like, this is Bet Me. This is like so in line
I can see
with
that.
that story. So, you know, it's definitely, if you like Olivia Dade, go back and read Jennifer Crusie. She has one that's I think it's called like Welcome to Temptation.
Yes.
And the family is a group of they take paintings, and the word is like and redo them.
Yeah, they're forgers.
Forgers, there's the word.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I know that there's a word.
I gotcha. I'm with ya.
That book is so fantastic.
Yeah. And Faking It's another great one. And that one was one where, for everybody that's familiar with like Alice Clayton's Wallbanger, which is, you know, one of the few romance stories that I think kind of made a splash because of the fact that they talked about like the missing orgasm. Faking It came out before Wallbanger and was very similar on the topic, was, you know, a woman faking her orgasm. So, I mean, there's a lot of foundations that we're seeing in stories being told today that we can trace back to Jennifer Crusie. Wow. And thank you for coming to our TED Talk.
Right? Just going to give you like the outline of where to go with romance.
Well, on that note, I would love for you to tell everybody about your podcast, Buzzing About Romance, especially since you do 1 million episodes, and there's also a summer reading challenge, which takes me back to my summer reading at the library days, earning that ice cream cone certificate, or you know, pizza stubs or whatever. So please brief everyone on what it is and how they can participate.
Sure. So Buzzing About Romance, we're a romance readers podcast. We have several kinds of different episodes. On Sundays, we drop they're usually about an hour-long episodes where we typically either do a list episode where we might, like, we just did a book boyfriend list, and we were joined by
the best.
We have 2 co-hosts that come in and out and help us out. It's Books to Katie on Instagram and Literary Illusions. And there are historical side of us, because Leah and I, my co-host Leah and I, aren't as big into historical anymore. So they came on and we did a list episode of our top 5 book boyfriends for each of us. So you got like 20 new book recs just from one episode. So that we do those kinds of episodes on Sundays. Sometimes there's author interviews. We have some really cool author interviews coming up. We just did Max Walker, who writes Mail, Intrigue, and romantic suspense. That's phenomenal. And then Roan Parrish, she's joining us at the end of June also to talk about writing queer romance. Is it amazing? I adore her.
Amazing.
So
amazing
fantastic.
Author, and also the co-host of another romance-oriented podcast, Dear Romance Writer.
Yes, I love it. So we do those kind of episodes, and then throughout the week, we drop what we call our quick shots of romance. They are quick 20-minute or less book review episodes. And we're joined by members of our Patreon, and they come on and we read a book together, and then we talk about it and tell you whether or not, you know, who would like it? Did we like it? Who would like it? And what type of reader would typically like this, and would you recommend it, kind of thing. So, and those we also put up on our YouTube channel, because we can't just be one place. We have to be all the places.
All the places, of course. Yeah. Well, and I love, you know, for anybody listening that's, you know, gets sick of listening to me talk for over an hour. I mean, 20 minutes, that's the perfect amount of time to, like, you know, put dinner together and hear about a book that you might want to pick up, or take the dog out for a walk. So, I think I love the bite-sized reviews, because then it's just, you know, something to keep your brain flowing, and maybe even add another book to the TBR list if we need more books. I mean, come on. But
that's kind of our goal, though. We are about building the TBR. But so a couple months ago, we added a couple of librarians to our podcast that come on intermittently to help us with book recs and, you know, why you should read, or tricks and tips of the trade and all that kind of stuff. And we were inspired to create a summer reading challenge that was reminiscent of our summer library experience.
And if people don't know what we're talking about, I am weeping for your childhoods because I was not even like the biggest reader growing up, but I loved the summer reading challenge at the library. Like it was something to look forward to.
We used to take a weekly visit. My mother would pack us on the car with our grocery sack, and we would go to the library, and you checked out your books for the week, and then you had to fill out a little slip of paper with what books you had read and then put them in the bowl. And sometimes there were drawings for other prizes, but then you always got like the pizza certificate or the ice cream cone from Dairy Queen, or the the cookie from the bakery down the road.
Yes.
And I love that. That was something that I'm not super competitive, but give me something that I'm really good at and I'm all in.
Well, and I am. I'm an Aries, so I just need any excuse to be competitive and I'm all in.
That's fair. So Leah and I created 9 bingo cards with a variety of different props. Some are just taking a picture of your TBR. Some of them are taking a picture of where you're reading. Some of them are taking a picture of what you're reading with your pet. And if you don't have a pet, then pull a stuffed animal or borrow your neighbor's
steal
pet.
one.
Yeah, we're not super picky. But it was just to encourage you. One of the things that we try really hard to do for our listeners, we call our little group the Hive of romance readers. We try to encourage them to step outside your box. We challenge you to read something that isn't your norm. I get stuck in I love billionaire romances. I love a secret baby. But sometimes, like, it's good to make me read a mafia romance or, we're huge hockey romance fans over on Buzzing About Romance.
Me too, girl.
We did an episode where I went head to head with one of our patrons. And we drafted our hockey book boyfriends.
Oh my gosh. It's like you're building your own team.
We did. Yes. 3 lines, 6 players per line. We could not repeat. So
that is fantastic. Okay, I'm going to have to, now as a patron of Buzzing About Romance, I'm going to have to circle back and find this.
Yeah, it's an episode it's out there in the world, wherever you get your episodes. But yeah, it's Minnesota Hockey Mom Reads. Her name is Heather. Oh. She and I went head to head, drafting our hockey book boyfriends. And there were a couple that it was like, I wanted him. And there's some that I'm like, you can have him.
You can have him.
But at the end of the day, we ended with 32 unique hockey romances that we all rated high enough that these were book boyfriends. And some people don't realize that they're, we always think of the big names, the Sawyer Bennetts, the Tony Aleos, the Kelly Jamesons that write the hockey romance. But there's some outliers there that you guys might not realize that have hockey romances. JC Burton, she has a hockey romance.
I've read it. Love it.
Yes. I love her sports romances, but there's Lorelei James. She has a hockey series that takes place up in Minnesota that is phenomenal.
Look at all these Minnesota things you're putting out here. Like right after I've left Minnesota. Where have I been?
But yeah, there's some really great other hockey smaller authors that you might not know. So that was part of our goal, was to be like, listen, if you're searching for your next hockey romance, try Gina Azzi, because her Boston Hawks, so good.
I don't think I've read her, so I will absolutely check her out. And I'm sure maybe this was on your list. This was actually one of our very first reviews for the podcast, and she was a new to me author at the time. I have now gone back and read everything, but Kate Meador.
Yes, I love Kate.
Oh my gosh. First of all, she is a delightful human being and has, messaged me and, talked to me about the podcast before. So I'm so thankful for that. But also she has her incredible hockey series. And then there's the next generation of that hockey team. It's so good. And it takes place in Chicago, which I spent a couple years in Chicago. So I absolutely adore it. But it's the Chicago Rebels, I think.
Yes, she's the Rebels.
Okay.
Because it gets all a little mixed up because there's like 6 hockey romances that take place. Because I think Victoria Denault, I think her hockey romances take place in, she's got some in San Francisco, but I think she has a couple that take place in Chicago also.
Well, it's cold. It's cold. We need something to watch for the coldest months of the year, and hockey is the way we do it in the Midwest.
So part of Summer Reading Challenge was kind of trying to get people outside their box because, like I said, we read all the hockey romances. So
nice.
And I had a random idea that I emailed some of the authors that we've done happy hour events for on our YouTube channel and asked them if they would just share our event in their newsletters. And I had a ton of authors email me back and ask if they could donate books and swag for prizes.
They're so
and
amazing.
I was like, that's so awesome. Thank you so much. So we're giving away like 2 different giveaways every Monday throughout the whole summer. Nothing repeats. We have had boxes full of swag with signed paperbacks, e-copies, t-shirts, book totes, all sorts of great stuff from authors like across the board. It's like Jiffy Kate and Roan Parrish and Jenna Hartley, Kelly Kay, just amazing authors. That Stacey Lynn has, Roan Parrish. So amazing authors with books that you're going to want to get your hands on. So
yeah, free swag all summer long. Hello. Right. I mean, what's not to love about that?
And you just have to read. So any book that you've read from May 20th through September 1st, you have the opportunity to every 5 books basically get you a bingo. And then rules can be found on our website, but we're not huge rule followers for everything. So,
well, there you go. That's the perfect segue into where can everybody find Buzzing About Romance and play along, listen to the podcast, support you on Patreon, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, we are Buzzing About Romance on all social media. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And then we are patreon.com/bookcaseandcoffee, which is the main blog that hosts all of our podcast endeavors and all the fun. And so buzzingaboutromance.com will get you to us. And then our podcast is available on pretty much all platforms. You can ask your smart device in your house to play Buzzing About Romance, and it plays. So,
well, there you go. At the time that this episode airs, you'll have celebrated your 1 year anniversary.
Our 1 year.
So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a passion project for like 8 years. I've wanted to do this, but timing in life was just never in a good place for it. And actually the pandemic provided an opportunity for me to be able to focus on this. I work in the publishing industry, so I wasn't having as many jobs at the time, and my husband was home, and life was the way it was. And so I was able to take my passion and be like, look, I now have an outlet for it. It's not without growing pains, and sometimes we're just still trying to find our footing, but every day I'm excited. I could talk romance books all day, every day for hours. So,
and you do. So, I mean, it works out.
It's like every day. I love it. It's, when you find something that you love and you get to do it, it makes it pretty amazing. So,
absolutely. Well, and now that I'm thinking about it, I want to say July 1st is the day that I put out the first episode of Boobies and Newbies. And so come this episode release, it'll be an anniversary for me as well. And so here we are. Congrats to us. OMG. Yes. We're still here.
Well, and it's amazing because I've done a couple podcast conferences. Average podcast last 8 episodes.
Isn't that insane? I am blown away by that. But you know what? It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work. And you have to love what you're doing in order to sustain it. You have to, because otherwise it's just finding time and not being paid to do it. And,
Right.
you know, you got to love it. And thankfully you and I both do.
Exactly. It's a passion, and you take
Yes.
it and you go with it, because you're right. People don't realize it's a lot of work. You've got to think of ideas and plot and plan, and there's rejection. That was, like, people will say, no, I'm not interested. And you're like, oh, okay.
You don't want to come talk romance with me? What?
Right? Like, why did you blow me off? I thought we were friends.
Well, I am glad that you are here. I am glad,
Thank
like I
you.
said, that we connected, and I'm very excited to play summer reading bingo and hopefully
Right?
take home some swag, because I'm all about that swag, girl. So, and you mentioned that reading outside of your comfort zone. And I will say, I think today's book that we're talking about is a great example, at least for me, of reading outside of my comfort zone.
Me too.
Because, okay, perfect. I am not a huge romantic suspense reader. And so this one was definitely outside of what I typically read. I knew when I chose the theme Spies in Disguise that there would have to be at least one true romantic suspense in there. And this is one of them. So there may be more throughout the month. Who knows? You'll have to stay tuned and see. But for the time being, today, Becky and I are going to be discussing Shot Through the Heart by Nicole Helm. And this is a brand new release from Harlequin Intrigue. It came out May 25th of this year. It's available for $4.99 Kindle edition. And it's also the second book in the North Star series. Obviously the first book is available as well. Book 3 is coming out in November of this year. So there's plenty of time to read the first two before the next one comes out. And I hadn't read the first one before reading this one. Becky, I'm going to assume you didn't read the first book in this series either.
I read it as a standalone also.
Perfect. And I think it worked fine as a standalone. I didn't feel like I was missing any pieces. I
don't think so either.
I think there's a little light discussion about an event that happened in the first book, but feel free to read this as a standalone, maybe for the buzzing about romance reading challenge. I'm sure there's got to be something suspenseful in that one of the bingo cards.
One of our prompt is romantic suspense. Another prompt that we have is takes place in a state you currently live. So if this one takes place in Nebraska and South Dakota and Wyoming, I think it hits all three states. So if you live in those states, this would qualify for that. And you can use one book to cover 2 squares per card. So,
well, there you go. Well, and I have to say, I just drove through like most of those states. So reading this right after finishing my road trip, I was like, wow, I feel targeted, but I chose this book. So really, this is on me.
That's fair.
Oh boy. So let me give everyone the brief synopsis. And for once, this is a brief synopsis. It usually is not, as our listeners know. So this is the brief synopsis for Shot Through the Heart, and then we will dive into our review. So here we go. She spent her life concealing her identity. Now she must trust an undercover agent to survive. Willa Zimmerman, which, by the way, until I read this synopsis, I had no idea that was her last name.
I didn't either. I don't know that we ever got her last name in the book.
They all just kept saying Willa, and like she would never tell anybody her last name. Yeah. So this is news to me. Willa Zimmerman grew up as the daughter of spies, so she's always known her life could be in danger. That's why when North Star undercover operative Holden Parker, can we talk about how masculine of a romance hero name that is?
Yeah, except I totally changed his name in the book.
Oh, because what? You just didn't like it?
I thought he was a Hudson, not a Holden. So the entire book, I thought his name was Hudson. Like when I start to write my notes, I wrote Hudson anyway.
Well, and I can see where anybody who is like not a Catcher in the Rye fan would like immediately change his name as well. Like they just don't want to be reminded of Holden Caulfield. So
fair. I didn't even make that connection, but yeah.
That's one of those books that I feel like when you talk to people and they read it in high school, it was either like their favorite book they ever read or the, top of their list of garbage books. So,
yeah.
Holden, Hudson, whatever you want. But, in the book, he's Holden. He's an undercover operative. Holden Parker follows her to her home seeking a lead on a hitman. She captures him. But soon they learn they're actually on the same side and they're being pursued by the same relentless foe. Together, can they stop a deadly hunter before they end up as the next victims? Dun, dun, dun. Yep, that's it. So, like I said, brief synopsis. And I will say, as far as synopses go, I kind of like them, where they just sort of hit like all the main points. Like I don't need to be told the entire story, much less set up like all of chapter 1 and then the story take a big turn. So I feel like if I had read the synopsis and then read the book, I would not be disappointed. They match enough for my personal. I guess I just have like I really focus on the synopses. I don't know why. It's just something that like if it doesn't match the book really bothers me.
I am not a big synopsis reader.
Okay.
And I'm totally like I'm such a cover whore. If it is a good cover and I know that the trope is a trope I mostly like, I buy it, I read it. I rarely read synopsis, which is how names get changed.
Hudson, Holden,
Right?
whatever. But no, I'm with you. For me, it's usually, I do love a good cover. However, for me, it's usually the author's name. Like if I hear a certain author and I'm like, oh, well, I've read her before. I know that I'll probably like this. And then the other one is when I first started reading romance, when I was the newbie, I would see the little blurb on covers that would be like a recommendation from another author that I knew and think, oh, well, I read her and she liked this book. So I think I can trust her. Let's do it. So now I do read the synopses, I think, when it comes to authors that I'm less familiar with. And this was Nicole Helm. Was that it? Nicole Helm?
Yeah.
She
Nicole
is
Helm.
a new author to me. So this was
I'd
one.
never read her before either. So
Yeah, this was a new one to me. And I was specifically looking for spies.
it was very Mission Impossible movie poster look to it.
It is. It's even got like the right font, I feel like,
Right.
for that.
Absolutely. It was funny because this is actually a Mass Pub Harlequin book.
Yes.
And I saw it on the shelf at my local Walmart. So
How
you could
exciting.
probably pick this up at the grocery store.
I love a good grocery store book, right next to like the Good Housekeeping magazines. So good.
I always tell people they don't understand the pain of what it used to be an old school romance reader when you had to like wait for it when it was hardback at $25
Yes.
or you had to wait for the paperback 6 months later.
No, thank you. Mm-mm.
People do not know the pain.
Y'all with your Kindles, it's just a click of a button.
Right? What chaos is that?
Well, Becky, I'll turn it over to you and ask you for some of your overall impressions about the book.
So romantic suspense, like for you, it is not always a definite one click for me. I'm a little picky on romantic suspense. I'm often accused of being in the closet with my love of romantic suspense. Overall, this, I really liked the story. It was an easy, quick read. It's 200 pages. So it was like an afternoon out in the sunshine.
Yes.
I really liked Willa. She's pretty badass. She comes with a lot of baggage from her parents. I can't imagine like growing up with your parents being spies and they pretty much moved her around all over the place. And
yeah.
But I did have moments like of sympathy for her because like I think she was just such a little bit of a lost soul, which I do kind of like in my heroines. I like them to, either be total badasses or kind of like these lost little dandelion seeds.
Yeah, and I feel like that was an interesting mix as well, just because, she does have the training and like, survival skills and badassery. Like, I mean, she's definitely not the waif. She's not the damsel in distress. And she
Oh,
specifically
absolutely
does
not.
not want to be. Like, she makes it clear, like, that is not the role that I am here to play, which I appreciate because I feel like if this book had been written in a different time, it would have been a very different portrayal of Willa. But
For sure.
I also like that she's got, mommy and daddy issues like just about everybody. So it's
Right.
just amplified because they're spies.
Well, right. And it creates this level of chaos to her life.
Yeah.
But I will say, and I don't know if it's because her parents were spies or just her personality, she's very perceptive of how people see her. Like, she seems to have, like, she knows that Holden looks at her and just sees like some backward country girl, like, because that's the first impression of her, versus she's actually got this like layer underneath her that makes her kind of a badass.
Mm-hmm.
So, I did, but she was aware that he saw her as being, in distress, the heroine in distress, like that she needed saved.
Yeah. And
but
aware also that she can like use things to her advantage too. Because there were moments where she would reflect on like, well, mom and dad taught me like, don't show all your cards or like, don't show them if you're feeling a certain way. And then she'd, act normal and then peace out through a back tunnel because there's like 8 of them under her farmhouse.
Right.
So, yeah, I will say I give this book an A as far as like the setting goes, because you've got like shitty farmhouse above ground full of animals, and then below ground is like tunnels and I mean like all the computers and like security. It's insane.
Well, and she has this whole moment where she's trying to tell Holden his cell phone is not going to work down in these tunnels.
Yeah.
And he pulls it out and his phone is working. And she's like, what the fuck? How does,
Yeah.
what? But she holds it back and it doesn't say anything like, I liked the use of technology in here too. It was very well done. But it wasn't so sophisticated that I was like, that's made up.
Right.
Like it felt doable. It felt real. Sometimes I get a little annoyed, and I know it's fiction. I know it's fiction, people. I read fiction. But sometimes when technology is like so far off what it actually is, and then you're like, that's annoying, because
especially
fake.
with spies where it's like, this is lipstick, but really it's a poison dart gun. I'm like, everybody's got very dangerous cosmetics in spy romances usually.
Or the heel that turns into a knife. Like, listen, people,
Yes.
I can barely walk in the heels, let alone
just stomp on him. It's a stiletto. You can take somebody out with just a stiletto heel. It doesn't also have to be a knife.
Right. It just feels like overkill there.
Right.
I also liked, like, I felt that Holden and Willa's connection. So I will say that the romance was a little lighter in this story. This was very much the story of intrigue and spy. If you like the current shows on CBS that is like the FBI or FBI Wanted type, it's very procedural. That's what I'll say.
Yes.
Like, I'm a huge Law and Order fan. This was very much spy procedural romance, because it was more about like, there's a threat. We're going to find out who the threat is. Then we figure out that we have a commonality together. You're not the threat. There's a bigger threat outlying there. And maybe we're going to save each other. The romance was kind of secondary in this story to the procedure of the threat and the spy-ness of it. So, if you like suspense, fictional suspense, but kind of want to try a little bit with some romance in it, this is great. This is perfect for that.
I agree with that. And you know what? That's the perfect way to describe it when comparing it to a procedural show, because even as the story begins, we're told that basically something happened in the previous book where they thought they solved the problem, but really it was just one piece of the puzzle. And so now this book, they're off to solve the next piece of the puzzle. And even at the very end, it's not a cliffhanger. I don't want to say that it's a cliffhanger ending, but there, you know that there's more to come in the next book. And books, I'm assuming. I think there's going to be several more in the series because we've got a whole team working together. I'm assuming most of the team members are going to get their own stories, and how their romances will figure into like future books, I don't know. But yeah, I'm with you. I don't think it's definitely not heavy on the romance. It is for sure a closed door romance. The farthest we get as far as like anything sexual goes is some making out and undressing, but then we cut away. So,
and even the sexual, like the kissing, the very first time that he kisses her, it's very flirty. It's very well written. And it alludes to the sex without being overly sexual. So even though it's light on steam, it still had some like steamy, flirty moments in it though.
Oh, for sure. And I didn't mind. I mean, I've said this before where, you know, obviously like my heat rating will be lower for a book like this, but I still think it was the way that it was written. I didn't need them to go off and have sex. Like I didn't need to take the time away from like the mission at hand. I kind of enjoyed the fact that we sort of like skipped to the, you know, hour later sort of situation. Although it was interesting to me because I don't think I've read this before where in the aftermath of the sex that they've had, he says something to her like, you should have told me it was your first time. And I was like, oh, I don't know if I've ever actually read a romance where I've just heard that phrase, like, you know, after the sex, as opposed to seeing that in the moment where like she says it's her first time, or he realizes she's a virgin, or, you know, the sex is painful. So I think that was new to me. And it's not necessarily a complaint. It's something that I would have liked to have. I like to see things. Like I like to see what's happening, and like I want to see the same thing later in the book where they get the bad guys. It felt a little rushed to me. Like I feel like we kind of like skipped over what everything had like been building up to. It's just like, oh, we got him. Everybody's captured. Dog saved the day, you know, woohoo. So there were a couple moments like that where I felt like maybe we were like skipping over some of them. And I think you could say that about like the sex scene, but I also didn't necessarily like miss the sex scene.
I didn't miss the sex scene. I miss the intimacy of the connection that we often get from the sex scenes.
Yeah.
So for me, you know, this one felt like you could have written this story. It would have been a fantastic story without the romantic element, because it was so subplot to the story. And, you know, whenever you read romantic suspense, it is obviously going to be more plot driven than it is character driven. But I think that we do get some of that character connection, especially with Holden and even with Willa. They're shared. They both have like trauma in their pasts.
Yeah.
The shared brokenness of their past, and both thinking future and forward, and not dwelling on the brokenness of their past. So that there creates some of the connection and intimacy that we didn't get because it was, you know, closed door. So that helped some of it, but it's not so much. So that's something that we talk about a lot. I like a sexy book. Do not get me wrong. I'm all in for the sexy books.
Oh, me too.
But if we can create intimacy, especially with like this is a slow burn. Obviously, she was a little more inexperienced. He's a little more worldly. If you can create intimacy through banter, physical connection, shared experiences, that can take us a long way without having to have sex.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one of my favorite examples of that was in one of our, yummy love episodes. Oh, I'm blanking on the book, but I'm going to look it up. It was Farah Haran's book. It's not Chai Factor. It's the
Is
other
it
one.
Accidentally Engaged?
Yes. And
I love that
the
story.
fact that they share so much through cooking together and, you know, getting to know each other. And it's not a very heat heavy book, except in the kitchen. But that was a great example to me of like them building like this intimate connection. And this one, I agree with you. I think because of their shared, shall we call it trauma bonding, I guess.
Right.
And then also the shared experience that they're going through now. Like we know when we do read like romantic suspense or you watch an action movie or something, there's the whole idea of like what do they call it? The danger boner, where it's like, oh, you know, we're in danger. This is hot.
Right.
We got to have each other right now. I actually kind of like the fact that they dispel that notion too. Like she even tells him, she's like, I didn't have sex with you just because I thought like we're going to die. And so I have to do this now. So I loved how self-aware the author was with this book, because there were several moments that I feel like were very tropey for romantic suspense, but she would then address it through the characters. And I thought that was really smart. So I loved that. And I do agree with you on the intimacy. I will say it was a very quick I love you for me, considering the whole book takes place over the course of like, what, 3 days? So.
Yes, I too had a hard time believing that this was truly love.
Right.
Especially given Willa's inexperience and the way it ends.
Mm-hmm.
It's, to me, it ends more happily for now.
Yes.
Versus happily ever after. Even though it's satisfying, but because it's so short, you're kind of like, okay, could you give me an epilogue? But you can't have an epilogue because there's book 3 that has to go with this overarching, threat. So, and again, it's not a cliffhanger, but there is a moment where you're like, well, this is kind of happily for now.
It was an interesting ending because I was like, I don't know if I was in Willa's situation, I don't know if I would have been satisfied with the ending that she was given, just because I don't know what the alternative would be. I mean, she's offered the option of basically like having her and her parents, the spies, have them fake their deaths and basically start fresh and new. Her and her mom would live with Holden Hunter, whatever you want to call him, and they'd be married. I just kept thinking though, I'm like, they're going to stay in this same town on this same piece of land. Like, she can't show her face places anymore and be a different person. Like, I don't know. Maybe that was just like my logical side of my brain taking over a little too much, but I was just like, you're giving me all these details about how they're going to start their new life together, and I just have so many questions about how that's going to work out.
I do also, and I also felt like Holden the whole time, he alludes to the fact about being asked to take a desk job or a promotion or something like that. And so this led to this air of him being a little unsettled.
Right.
And then you have someone with Willa who's super inexperienced. And I'm supposed to be like, okay, he's decided in a moment of 3 days that there's this connection now and that he's going to accept this promotion and this desk job and move to Nebraska.
You know, where all great romances begin, in Nebraska. So no shade. I'm sorry to anybody who listens that's in Nebraska.
Yeah. We love all the people of Nebraska, but I'm just not sure. I don't know. It is interesting as we've read it to go on and to read book 3. I don't know if I will or not, but if you like book 2, I could see where book 3 would be, and I don't dislike this book. I don't mean it like that. I just see that maybe book 3 will give me some of the satisfaction and answers that I didn't get in book 2.
Right.
So
Well, and I'm interested. I didn't look to see if the synopsis is out for book 3 yet or not, because I'd be curious whose story it is. Because I will say one of my favorite things about this book is the fact that so many women work at this North Star, private agency.
and they have the smart jobs. They're the hackers and
Yeah.
the like the commander of the operations and assigning things. And so they're like powerful, strong women. So yes, I would agree with you. Like it would be interesting. I wonder if the boss is Stella, I think is her name, right? Shay.
Yeah.
See, I just renamed people. This is how my brain works.
They were both S. I mean, Hunter and what's the other one? I don't even remember his
Hudson.
real name now.
I thought he was Hudson. Holden. Well, his real name in the book is Holden.
At least you got the right letter,
Right.
So, but yeah, no. And then there's the computer hacker,
Elise.
Okay, yeah,
Elise.
there we go.
I got that one. Elise.
Okay. Yeah, and I just was really even when it comes time, Shay keeps calling in like all these people to like help. Like she's just pulling people out of thin air, and most of them are usually women too. I'm just like, I am really into like this network of these badass women, like, and then this dude and like the new guy that's joined them and the old retired Granger that shows up with like his beard and everything. I just was like, I am here for this company. Like, I don't necessarily understand everything they do. However, I do like the team members. So I could see where that would be the reason why I would come back and either read book 1 or go on to read the rest of the series, because I do like the team.
Yeah. And like I said, they're short and fast. So if you're just looking for a book because the kids are going to spend the day at the pool, you can grab this off your grocery store shelf, sit by the pool, and you've had a great afternoon with a well-written story.
Yeah.
With, and like I said, especially if you're kind of not all in on romance, this is a great segue in, because it isn't super sexy and in your face, which sometimes if you pick up some other romantic suspense, you might be like, what did I just read?
Well, you know what? Sometimes even if you're, a longtime romance reader like we are, like sometimes you're just not in the mood for that. Sometimes you just want.
We call those our palate cleansers. Like,
yes. I mean, and that's exactly what this was for me, because I just finished this long ass move. I know that there's more to do, in a few weeks, and I have had the hardest time concentrating on reading a 300 plus page novel. So the fact that this was like a little less than 200 pages, I could bang this out in an afternoon. It was perfect, and it was not a difficult read. It's romantic suspense, but like you said, Becky, there's not like, I don't have to buy into like computer jargon or wild spy terms, and like, that's great. That has a time and a place, but it's not what I want as a palate cleanser. And so this one was perfect for me at this point in time.
Yeah. And I think given that it's procedural, that it just, you go to A to B to C, and it's good with the end. And I like that. I think that's okay. So that's my thought on the book.
Well, we've talked about Willa. Let's talk a little bit about Hunter, Hudson, Holden. I feel like we're just adding names to him.
Names for him.
Let's talk about him, because he is our hero, and I love a man who. No, that sounds weird. I was gonna say I love a man who carries a gun, but that's not what I meant. I do love a good spy or a con man, or like, I love somebody who kind of plays between the lines of like black and white, I guess.
But I don't think he was super typical. I think he was atypical, because he actually listens to Willa.
He does.
He doesn't just push in and take charge and be like, lady, you're doing what I say. Like, he listens to her. He seems empathetic to Willa. And I think he is heartbroken for her because of this situation her parents had put her in.
Sucks.
I also think Willa impresses him quite a bit. And I think that shows the level of confidence. Sometimes, you know, when you read romantic suspense, you get these really overfilled testosterone jock, like, I am man, watch me yield gun. Holden was not that.
No.
He was more cerebral, more thoughtful in his actions.
Questions. I love questions.
And super observant to Willa and to her plight, and not stupid. He wasn't just brunt force. He was very thoughtful, very cerebral. And I think that made him a little bit more attractive.
I agree. He was probably one of the least He-Man type action heroes that I feel like I've read. And I appreciated that. Now, if you're looking for the super alpha male, tells you what to do kind of thing, probably not going to love him as much. However, I like a more close to realistic, like, man that I would want to encounter in my real life. I found him more appealing because of everything that you're saying, Becky. And I will say the one thing, I totally forgot about this until we mentioned that he listens and like asks questions, but the one thing that drove me crazy for the first like 25% of the book is the fact that they never answer each other's questions. Like, he'll say, what's your name? And she's like, well, what's your name? Well, what are you doing? Well, what are you doing? And I'm like, I get it. Nobody wants to like trust anybody. You don't want to be the first to give in, but oh my gosh, did I get annoyed with that back and forth dialogue. So it does pass, I will say. We do get past that point. However, it was a tough one for me.
Yeah. No, and I can see that. It didn't bug me as much because sometimes I get frustrated when it's all internal dialogue. So I felt like with the questions, we were able to kind of get to know them and perceive their personalities and kind of their walls and how they close off themselves, because, you know, it's dangerous. He works for this, and you don't even know if North Star is like a branch of the government, if they're just a security force. Are they like total intrigue? Like, you're not exactly sure what they are exactly. And so, I mean, is this a group that the government is calling to help them when they need people that work on just that side of gray?
Or do they just help out whether the government wants it or not?
Right. Are these the people that the rich people are calling to save their kidnapped, you know, daughter from spring break? You know, like, we're not sure exactly what North Star's role is.
Right.
So we had to perceive that there were walls and, you know, that there was secrecy. And I felt like the questions in the dialogue, and I could see where it would be annoying, but I liked that kind of showed us like where their walls were in the story, like their personalities and stuff, because I'd rather have that than sometimes I get frustrated and bogged down in internal dialogue.
Yeah. I get that.
I want to perceive it. I don't need you to tell me it. It's just totally snotty.
I totally understand. No, and for me, I've just found that repetition is something that, whether it's dialogue or something else, like if we see a scene and then we hear somebody regurgitate what just happened in that scene, really bothers me. It's something that I just know is not for my personal reading preference. I'm like, I saw it. Yeah. I already saw it. You don't need to tell me what happened again.
That can be very frustrating in dual point of view when they switch from like one character's narration to the next character's narration. And we end up going basically backwards 5 pages so that we have it from the new perspective of the character. And you're kind of like, okay, I didn't need to hear his side of what he heard from her. I don't need that. So no, repetition, I will agree with you. And I could see where it was kind of annoying, but I tend to be a little more banter driven, like dialogue driven in my stories. So Holden, the back and forth of the questions, it didn't bug me too much.
You were like, this is sexy. They're just going back and forth and pestering each other. This banter.
It's just
ooh.
flirty. It's just flirty. I will say Holden is like his connection to his team, his fierceness, and the protectiveness of everyone. That was pretty fantastic. Like, if you like a protective hero, he is totally your protective hero.
Yeah, I agree. And it's so funny. I've read 2 books back to back now that were both on the shorter side, and they both had heroes that I feel like in a different story by a different author could have been very dominating alpha male if told by somebody else in that situation. And both of them were not that. Were very like, they listened to the heroines. They acknowledged that they weren't going to try to overstep her and tell her what to do because they didn't want that relationship. And so I was like, wow, okay, this is something that I didn't know I needed. But now that I've read it, I might have to step away from my alpha males for a little bit and focus on these heroes. So yeah, it just goes to show you, your romance journey, you're always learning new things about yourself, what you like, and it's always changing. Like, there are things that I love about books that I read 10 years ago, but there's also plenty of books I'm reading now that I wouldn't have glanced at 10 years ago. So,
and I have that often. So I get that. And we actually created a new name for a type of hero that's kind of like what these guys are. We're calling them the Cinedoms. So they're like the cinnamon roll hero with the alpha dom protectiveness to them.
I'm here for it.
So Cinedom, that's our new buzzing hero right now that we're all crazy about.
I am here for it. Those and Stern Brunch Daddies. Totally
here. Oh my God,
Stern
Brunch Daddies.
For all of it. I want t-shirts with all of these on them, by the way.
Speaking of Stern Brunch Daddy, if you haven't read Mimi Kinley's spicy little novellas that are out there, they're on Kindle Unlimited. She has one that's Becoming His Baby Girl. They're very tropey.
Ooh.
But they're super sexy. They're about 60 pages, so they're quick, fast reads. But she has a hero in that one that is like Stern Brunch Daddy. Like, that was her inspiration.
Yes.
Anyway.
Okay. I'm adding it to the list. I've been on a novella streak lately, so I think I might just have to keep it up in between our. She has
6 of them. She started them in New Year's. She's like Naughty in New Year's, and then Stranded with My Best Friend's Brother. Anyway.
Always good.
Scoring Position, which is a baseball novella, like that's super sexy. Super sexy.
And I've been watching a lot of baseball games lately, so I am here for it.
Yes. Anyway, if you haven't read Mimi Kinley, I highly recommend her. She's spicy little sexy novellas.
Love it. Sure. Love it. We are giving out all the book recs this episode. Y'all didn't even know it.
This is what happens when you invite me.
Yes, I am here for it. No, and I always want to talk more books, but there's just not enough time. I have to do what you've done and do like 3 episodes a week, apparently, to be able to get through it.
7,000 episodes. We tease members of our hive. We're like, so tell us, what is your current unread on Kindle? And they're all like ashamed to say, they're like, please don't make us say it. Please don't make us say it. I'm like, nope, gotta tell me how many. Current number winning is like 1427 is the current number.
That's okay. I feel a little bit better about myself then.
That's fair.
Oh gosh. Well, okay. Any other notes about this one before we dive into our ratings? And this is something where I'm very excited to talk about ratings on Buzzing About Romance, because I know that that's part of the discussion topic that we're going to be doing. So everybody look out for that episode coming soon.
Right. That one will drop on July 16th. So,
ooh, okay.
July 16th, we're going to talk about ratings. Kelly, you and I and my co-host Leah, we're going to deep dive into. I have so many thoughts on ratings, people.
Oh my gosh. Well, and you and me both. And it's something where, when we started Boobies and Newbies, I've kind of kept with well, first of all, I love a good alliteration. So any excuse to like do that, I'm here for. So I think I started Boobies and Newbies with story, syntax, and sexcapades as my ratings. And, I'm an Aries. I get bored. And so I decided, well, hell's bells, let's switch it up a little bit. And it became the heart, humor, and heat ratings. Now, of course, every romance book doesn't have humor. Every romance book doesn't have heat. So there's always a catch in the system, and it's something that I'm constantly thinking about. There's a little insight for all of our listeners that I'm never satisfied with the ratings that I choose for this podcast because it's such a subjective thing. Like there is no, end all be all for how hot a romance is. I do appreciate bloggers and podcasters who define what like a heat scale looks like for them. Like I love those. I've said on this podcast that for me, when it comes to heat, if it's sex on the page, it's at least a 5 out of 10. That's kind of like where my ratings start. But I don't know. It's something where I'm sure by the time this episode is out and I'm already starting to think about next season, it'll be a whole new thing. So get ready, everybody.
Rating system. Maybe we'll inspire a new rating system when we talk on Buzzing About Romance.
I certainly hope so. And I can't promise that it'll go into effect until probably 2022. But in the meantime, we'll stick with what we've got for now. Yes. And so for now, we are going to be grading for heart, humor, and heat on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the very best that it could possibly be. So let's start with heart. And I know that this was one that you asked me a little bit about for clarification.
I was just trying, I didn't know if heart was like the intensity, a connection between the two characters, if it was just the soul of the book.
I like that.
I wasn't quite sure. So I just wanted a little more definition because that's just who Becky is.
Oh, no, I appreciate it.
So I actually put this as heart is an average of 7 because the connection between Will and Holden was born out of necessity. Mm-hmm. So there was a little bit of feeling of like not genuine. So that got rated a little lower. So for me, for like main character connection for heart was about a 5. So average. But Holden's connection to his team, the fierceness of his protectiveness of everyone that was involved was a 9. Like he was fierce and protective. Willa and her parents, I felt so one-sided for Willa on that one. But so on Willa's side, it was a 7. On her parents' side, it was like a 2 because they pretty much treated her like a sacrificial lamb. Yes. So averaged all out, I put my heart at a 7.
Okay. And I feel like you've touched on a lot of great points there with her and her family, with him and really his family. I mean, this really is like his found family is the team that he works with. And then adding Willa into the mix. And I'll be curious to see, I would love to see her become part of the team personally in future books, like especially since she has skills. Like I thought that's where we were heading, but I don't know. We're left a little bit open-ended at the end. So sure. I went with a 6. So I think we're in the same ballpark. And really it all came down to the fact that, like we've already mentioned, the romance itself was so secondary to the suspense plot, which is fine. It's just I want to make sure people know going into it, this is not going to be the angsty, tear-ridden love story that you've been pining for. You're going to get some action and you're going to have some great familial elements. That team will do anything for each other. Like they follow him into the fire. And I love that about this team. I mean, like I said, I love this team. Like that's what's going to bring me back to read future books in the series, if I do decide to read future books in the series. But the love story itself and Willa's relationship with her family, that one just pissed me off a little bit.
I had a lot of anger towards her parents.
Yeah.
There was a lot of anger. Like I said, though, Holden kind of makes up for it. So he gets pushed a little higher up. So yeah, so about a 7.67. I think that's fair for heart of this book.
I do too. Humor is one where this might be one of the books that I might rank as like not applicable when it comes to humor. Although there are some cute moments.
So I put it as a 5 just because Willa's sass. Like with her animals there in the beginning with the post office. You know, right? The goats and the dog Jim.
The cat
Jim.
Pam.
Right?
Jim and Pam.
I felt like there was like enough sass of hers. No, it's not a funny book. But there's like gunshots and beatings with metal pipes. Like,
right.
You're not going to like go into this one belly laughing, but there's enough on page banter and sass that brings some, takes away some of the levity out of the book and brings a little bit of humor into the story.
Yeah, I agree. And you know what? There were a few things that I highlighted because I found them amusing. In fact, I mean, first of all, I just loved the names that she gave her animals. Like, she names a cat Kelly, which I was just like, well, that's a new one for me. And, you know, she's got her dog Jim, her other cat Pam. Holden at one point says one of my favorite lines I think I've read, which is where they tell him he's going to South Dakota, and he says, not a snowball's chance in flat prairie hell. And I was like, wow, I want that like on a sign for South Dakota. Or no, Nebraska, you know,
for Nebraska.
I mean, again, they're very similar. I've driven through both of them, but, so, you know, I would probably go a little bit lower. I'd probably go like 3 or 4. However, that's still to say that there's some humor. It's not nothing. I mean, there's still like some, like you said, there's some breaks in the drama, the suspense. There are these lighter moments, even if it's just a dog named Jim, which I'm okay with. Jim, by the way, is like the hero of the whole book, which fantastic. Good on you, Jim. So, and then we come to Heat, which, like I told you, Becky, for me, my personal scale is that I think of on the page sex as at least a 5 out of 10. However, I feel like I break my own rules sometimes, which I know you like to break rules too, so it's fine. In that sometimes there's books I read where the foreplay is so fantastic, but there's no sex on the page. And should that not be rated higher than a book without sex on the page? I mean, it's really, again, I need to rethink the rating system because it's hard to give a blanket statement to like a book when there's so many different things to look for. So I'd love to hear what your rating is as far as the Heat goes.
So for me, this was a Heat of 2. I do like a sexier, steamier book. So, I mean, in the Buzzing About Romance world, fade to black is a 4-letter word. That's like a problem for us. So because of the nature of romantic suspense, I think it's hard. You can't really be flirting and have intense chemistry when bullets are shooting past your head.
Danger boner.
Right? You can flirt, though, if you're trying to stop a hitman and not die. I felt like it just was low on chemistry. And like I said, I think her inexperience plays into that a little bit for me. The romance was secondary. So it's just a little lower. There were moments where there was connection. Like I said, there was the first kiss, you know, when she talks about like being afraid to breathe and touching her in such a gentle reverence, I think is how the author, that had some steam to it, which is why I wasn't like, there's no steam in this book. It's just very low, which is okay because this is one of those where the romance is more about the plot of the bad guys versus the relationship. Right. So what was your Heat level on this one?
Oh boy. I did give it a 2 as well. Because I'm with you. I liked the flirting. There were still a couple kisses. There's an undressing leading up to sex. We have some cuddling in the aftermath of sex. Like, I think there's still some of the things that I love about reading love scenes in general. Like, I love everything that leads up to penetrative sex, and I love everything that follows from it. I like the mess, as people who listen to this podcast know. I want the messier the better. So I think that's about where I lie, because we don't actually get, sex on the page, but I think it was very fitting for the story we had. Could they have gotten a little hot in like the control room in the bunker? Oh yeah, absolutely. But that's a different story. That's a different story by a different author, and that's perfectly fine. I would have loved both versions of the story, no problem. So that's where I'm gonna leave it. Is that a 2.0? So yeah, that's
Fair.
That sums it up. So, well, Becky, it has been a delight. I'm glad that we each stepped outside of our comfort zones with this one.
No, I think it's great. And I'm excited to listen and hear all your next reading choices.
Yay. Well, and now the listeners have like 8,000 book recommendations to add to their list. You've got hockey, you've got spy, like you are set, and you can go cross off all those bingo card boxes for buzzing about romance.
Summer reading challenge. Yep. Earn prizes by reading good books. Come on, people. It's perfect.
Yeah. It's as easy as that. Summer well spent. So I am looking forward to playing along as well. And, like Becky mentioned, there's an episode of Buzzing About Romance coming up that you'll hear me on. And we're going to talk all about my flawed rating system and ratings in general.
No, it's not your fault. It's rating hell. Like, really, ratings are... I have so many issues, and it's not.
We're all victims of the system.
Yes, the stupid 5-star system. It's dumb. Don't get me started. Well, actually, I am going to get started on it. So come listen to Buzzing About Romance with Kelly.
There you have it. Well, thanks again, Becky, and I'm so excited to see what comes next from Buzzing About Romance, and just all the fun to be had with romance discussions, because there's plenty more to come.
There is. So thank you for having me, Kelly. This was delightful, and I love boobies and newbies, so thank you.
Thanks so much for listening. Boobies and Newbies is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts. You can follow Boobies and Newbies on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Boobies Podcast.